This is a real story that happened with my friend.
I am an engineering student, and we were having our semester-end exams. My friend, whom I'll refer to as Sam, and I was studying in my room. We stay in a hostel.
It was night, and we both were studying.
I went outside the room just to see what others were doing, and Sam was in his room.
I have a bad habit of scaring people, so after some time, I quietly went back to the room without making my friend aware.
I stood behind him without making any noise, waiting for him to see me. He was very scared after suddenly seeing me. He went mad, was literally in tears, and asked me not to do this again. One more thing is he never used to sleep alone in his room at night, even when his roommate is not present.
He wants one among us to sleep with him. On that day, he told me the reason why he used to do that.
Continuing the story, he continuously told me not to play such pranks with him in the future. When I asked him, he said something very bad happened to him.
When he was in school, that's the reason he was scared to sleep alone at night.
So I became curious and asked him what the incident was, but he refused to say and did not want to remember those things.
I did not budge and somehow convinced him to tell the story.
So he started narrating the story. Once when he was in 9th grade, they used to
have extra classes, and the school was far from home.
So he and his other 4 friends decided to rent a room near their school for a few days. Their parents agreed, and they took a room in a building under construction.
It was the only house in that locality, and it was under construction. The area around was kind of a forest.
All 5 of them were studying.
It was cold outside, and the sun had already set. They were sitting with a lamp and studying because there were no lights as the house was still under construction.
The door was open, and suddenly they saw something white pass through the door.
They were confused about what the thing was, but they ignored it, and all slept. At midnight, one among them started behaving very weird.
He wanted to say something, but no words were coming out of his mouth. He was crying and helpless. All of them were scared by seeing their friend's condition, but somehow they made him calm down, and all slept.
The next day, when they asked him why he was behaving so weird, what he said was really scary.
I was shocked and literally shivering when Sam told me this. He said that the evening before, when they were all studying, suddenly they saw a white-colored thing passing. This boy actually saw a lady in a white sari holding a baby in her hands, constantly staring at his eyes.
He said last night he was crying and behaving weird because this same lady was sitting on his chest. He wanted to ask for help, but no words were coming out. After hearing this, they thought something was not right with the place and decided to leave. When they were leaving, on the other side of the road in front of the house, there were a lot of people standing, making a group.
When they went there to see, to their surprise, there was a dead body of a newborn baby wrapped in white cloth.
After hearing this story, I was scared to hell, and I did not sleep that night.
As a 10-year-old girl living in the quaint town of Carolingia, Guatemala, life was simple and filled with the innocence of childhood. Our small house, nestled near the corner street, held a sense of comfort and familiarity, especially with the convenience store nearby, where I often spent time with my friends. One particular day in the year 2001 stands out vividly in my memory, even now, as I recall it, at the age of 32. It was a day like any other, the sun casting its warm rays upon our little town, painting everything in a golden hue. I was playing outside with my friends, laughing and chasing each other around the familiar streets. As the afternoon sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets, I found myself alone for a moment near the corner of our street. That's when I saw him, a figure standing in the shadows, his skin a deep crimson hue, grinning at me with an unsettling expression. My heart pounded in my chest as fear gripped me like icy fingers. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure, his grin seeming to widen with each passing second. It felt like an eternity passed in that moment, though in reality, it was only a matter of seconds. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Fear had frozen my vocal cords, leaving me paralyzed in place. My mind raced with a million thoughts. Who was this strange red-skinned man? What did he want? Was I in danger? Just as suddenly as he appeared, the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving me trembling in his wake. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move. until the sound of my parents' voices calling me broke through the haze of fear. When I finally made it back home, I tried to explain what I had seen to my parents and the others who were there that day. But they dismissed it as nothing more than a child's overactive imagination. But I knew what I saw was real, and the memory of that red-skinned figure haunted me for years to come. Even now, all these years later, the memory of that day still sends shivers down my spine. It's a reminder that sometimes the things we see in the shadows are more than just figments of our imagination. They're a glimpse into a world beyond our own, a world filled with mysteries we may never fully understand.
Ever since childhood, I've harbored a peculiar connection to the supernatural, a sensitivity that often sent shivers down the spines of those closest to me, especially my parents. As the years unfolded, their tales of my eerie encounters formed a mosaic of the inexplicable and the uncanny. One chilling episode unfolded in the house of my dad's youth, a place steeped in memories and shadowy echoes. My grandpa, his father, had departed this world when my dad was a mere 15. On a visit to the ancestral home, I found myself drawn to my grandpa's old recliner. Seated there, I transformed from a typical, animated toddler to an eerie stillness. Fixing my gaze on my father, I uttered a name foreign to my limited vocabulary, "Hey Fargo." Fargo, an obscure family nickname for my father, long buried in the recesses of his past. The air thickened with unease as my dad grappled with the inexplicable. The visit was abruptly concluded, leaving an unsettling residue in the air. During my adolescent years, my father's nomadic lifestyle led us to the foothills of Colorado. Nestled in the seclusion of the mountains, our home seemed tranquil, but the tranquility was deceptive. One afternoon, immersed in a video game in the basement, I heard the unmistakable sound of hurried footsteps. Descending the stairs, a common occurrence in a bustling household of 5 siblings. Intrigued, I glanced towards the stairs, catching a fleeting glimpse of blonde hair disappearing into one of the downstairs bedrooms. Assuming it was my sister, I resumed my gaming, dismissing the incident. Hours later, I queried my dad about my sister's earlier dash to my room, only to learn she had spent the entire morning at a friend's house. Alarmed, my father sought divine intervention, having the house blessed. Little did we know that the supernatural forces at play were far from benign. The following morning brought a terrifying revelation. Flames erupted from beneath the stove, a cataclysmic event attributed to a leaky gas line. The blessing had inadvertently unearthed a malevolent presence, averting a potential tragedy. My journey through the realms of the paranormal continued as I delved into the intricacies of love and relationships. Courting my now wife led me to her ancestral farmhouse, a structure with its own trove of secrets. One fateful night, I found myself ensnared in a dream, awakening to the spectral visage of an elderly woman. Clad in garments reminiscent of the early 1900s, she emanated an overwhelming aura of hostility, a palpable disdain for my presence. Startled awake, my Apple Watch betrayed the intensity of the encounter, displaying a heart rate that mirrored my tumultuous dream. Desperate for an explanation, I recounted the dream to my wife's father, who responded with a photograph. The image bore an uncanny resemblance to the malevolent apparition from my dream's wife's great-grandmother. The revelation laid bare a family secret, as he disclosed the woman's reputation for bitterness and a vehement aversion to guests. These tales merely scratch the surface of my otherworldly encounters. Each episode, a brush with the supernatural, left an indelible mark on my life, weaving a tapestry of inexplicable events that defied the boundaries of the known and plunged me into the enigmatic depths of the paranormal. The inexplicable, it seems, is woven into the very fabric of my existence, forever intertwining my reality with the spectral realms that lurk just beyond the veil.
Gran has played a pivotal role in safeguarding my life on multiple occasions. Reflecting on these experiences, they came to mind while I was grocery shopping and encountered the familiar scent of Aquanet hairspray, a fragrance closely associated with my gran. She passed away a month before my 16th birthday, but remained a significant presence in my life, having helped raise me. Despite her physical absence, Gran continued to watch over me, the first instance being when I was 18. While at a friend's house with several others, we distinctly heard Gran's voice urgently warning us about a fire. Rushing to investigate, we discovered smoke filling her walkout basement. Thanks to her timely warning, we managed to evacuate and alert her family, ultimately averting a potential disaster. The second incident occurred in my early 20s during a camping trip in the Rockies with my then significant other. In the serene setting of Medicine Bow National Forest, I woke up to Gran's voice advising us to leave immediately due to an impending danger. Initially dismissing it as a dream, her persistent warnings compelled us to abandon our campsite. The next day, we learned that a couple just half a mile away had been struck by lightning in their tent the night before. While not life-threatening, the third instance held significant emotional weight. At 25, I unexpectedly lost my husband shortly after the birth of our child. Devastated and adrift, I moved back home with my newborn, battling depression and postpartum issues. One night, on the porch with my baby, I felt Gran's comforting presence. Though I didn't physically hear her reassuring words in my mind marked a turning point. Encouraged by her guidance, I sought therapy and gradually navigated through my grief, eventually finding a new partner. The most recent encounter took place over a decade ago when I was pregnant with my second child. While driving home late at night, Gran's unmistakable scent and voice intervened, compelling me to stop at an intersection. As I halted, a truck zoomed through the intersection just 20 feet ahead, narrowly avoiding a collision. This incident, like the others, reinforces my belief that the connection to the other side may be closer than we perceive. In summary, Gran's influence continues to guide and protect me, transcending the boundaries between life and whatever lies beyond. I never actually believed in ghosts, maybe because I have never had any experience. But this incident has changed my whole perspective of the paranormal. This experience is not mine, it's my mother's. She works as a nurse in a hospital in Kolkata, West Bengal. The day this incident happened to her, she had to do an evening shift, and the day after that she had a morning shift. During such consecutive shifts, my mom prefers to stay at the hospital in her room along with her colleague rather than return home at night and again head back to work in the morning. On that day, during her evening shift, she started running a fever, and by the time her shift was over, at 11 p.m. she was really sick. So she just informed a fellow doctor about her fever, and after a quick prayer, she's very spiritual, quickly went off to sleep in her room. Her roommate was on a night shift, so she was alone in her room. Anyway, she quickly dozed off to sleep. It was about 2 in the morning when she heard the door of her room open. She was surprised because she never sleeps with the door open. But she thought maybe she had forgotten to latch the door, as she was very tired and sick. She saw someone dressed in a white coat. He had a stethoscope around his neck. She thought he might be a doctor who is on night rounds and came to check on her since she had informed earlier that she was sick. Suddenly she felt unusually cold in her room, as if someone had switched on the AC. As the man approached her, she noticed that, with every step he took towards her, his face started to change. And what followed was even more strange. His face took the form of every single person she had met in her life, including me and my family. She was petrified. She couldn't utter a word, forget screaming. My mom tried to be rational and thought she was hallucinating under the influence of fever. She blinked a few times and then looked at the figure. This time she noticed that he had a handsome but unfamiliar face and was standing right next to her by the bed. He did not speak to her or ask her any questions. He just reached out his hand and started checking her neck for temperature. By this time she was convinced that he was a doctor and nothing else. She noticed something quite odd though. As soon as he placed his hand on her neck, she noticed that his hands were very cold. When it got unbearable, she tried to get rid of his hand, but to her surprise, he reached out his other hand and started choking her. My mom was terrorized by this, and when she looked up to his face, it once again started taking shape of all her loved ones. She wanted to scream at that moment, but she couldn't even manage a whisper. That's when she realized that she had a Hanumanji, the monkey god, in her bag, close to her bed. Luckily, she quickly reached out for it, and as soon as she held it in her hand, that creature, whatever it was, just gave out a howl and vanished into thin air. My mom quickly got out of the room, taking the Hanumanji with her. She fled to her friend's room, and after catching her breath she told her everything. She was also startled on hearing this and said that she had had similar experiences in the hospital, like the lights going on and off on their own at night and sounds coming from a closed room, etc. Anyway, for the rest of the night she stayed with her and returned home in the morning after applying for a leave. When she came home, she tried to act normal and told my dad she wasn't feeling well. She seemed quite worried about something. When I asked her what was it, she was reluctant at first because she did not want to scare me. But I insisted, and she shared her experience with me. I was shocked to hear that such a terrible thing happened to her, since she was such a spiritual person. Mom still works at that hospital, but she never leaves home without her Hanumanji. I believe it was a very frightening experience for my mother and also for me. I definitely don't want to go to that hospital anytime in my life. Hope you loved this story, which was told by my mom. According to her, this is a true story, and she isn't faking it. The following experience was shared by a very close friend of mine. In 2011, my friend's sister had enrolled in an engineering college that had on-campus boys and girls hostels. Nisha, her sister's changed name, got a room with Ria name changed on the second floor of the C building of girls hostels. The room was supposed to be a 3-sharing room, but the third girl was not assigned due to unknown reasons. Hence, the third bed and cupboard were empty since the day Nisha joined. The first week was pretty normal with classes, assignments, and exploring the new city. It was in the second week when Ria started acting strangely. She started staying awake through the mornings. It was rare for Nisha to have a conversation with her, as she had inverted sleep cycles. Even when awake, she spoke very little. This continued until one night when Nisha suddenly woke up and saw the lights of the room were on. And Ria was sitting at her study table, her hair all open and spread, and her book placed inverted in front of her. Nisha called Ria's name, once, twice, thrice, louder each time, but there was no reply. On the fourth attempt, when Nisha called loudly enough for their neighbors to wake up, Ria looked up, but it was a horrific sight for Nisha. Ria's eyes were wide open and red, and she whispered, "Sleep." This was enough to scare Nisha. She somehow managed to fall asleep until 6. The next day, as soon as she finished her lectures, she went to their warden's office to apply for changing her room. When the warden asked for the reason she wanted to change rooms, she mentioned how uncomfortable it was to live with Ria. The warden's eyes widened and she said, "There is no one in that room except you. In fact, no room partner was assigned to you from day one."
I heard this one from my brother. I think I was in 11th grade. Here goes. It happened to a friend of his during his college period of life. My brother and his friends were preparing late night for a test the next day. Few hours after 12 o'clock, they decided to call it a night and went to their rooms to sleep, except one guy Sayar. He went to his room and kept on reading. The next day when my brother and his friends went to wake her up, they see him lying unconscious on the floor with the door half opened. They took him to hospital, and this is what he told. He was studying as usual in the dead of night when he heard a soft knock on the door. Upon opening it, he finds a faint misty appearance of a small kid around 10 years of age, with a chunk of his head missing and blood dripping from it wetting the floor, and he held a bowl in his one hand and said, "Amar na accident hoich, ameg ekcharakto deep." Translation: I have had an accident. Would you give me some blood? This ghastly sight was more than enough to send his head whizzing, and he fell on floor. Here's where it gets really scary. Steady your nerves. The next day after the incident, the local paper reported that a 10-year-old boy had died in a car accident the previous night, a few kilometers away their college campus. On seeing the photo of the deceased, star claimed it was the same boy who had begged him for blood the night before yesterday. P.S. My brother narrated this incident while we, my cousins as well, were returning by road from Diagar after a family trip at night along a deserted highway.
Nerve-wracking incident ahead. This incident was narrated by my house help around 56 months back before the lockdown began. She said she lost her job in the neighboring building. She said the house members were leaving that apartment and were shifting for better as living there would cause problems to the family. The apartment was rented by a couple who lived with their mom, dad, and a 6-month-old child. Everything was going fine for about 1.5 months. The house was filled with fun and laughter. They were living a peaceful life, unknown of the fact that something dreadful was coming their way. It was in the month of February they started experiencing unusual happenings in the house. They started hearing creepy and eerie sounds in night, falling of utensil. They also started feeling the presence of an unnatural wraith-like entity around them. As the day dawned, things started getting spooky. The whole atmosphere used to change. They started feeling things which they never felt before. There was something wrong which was bothering the entire family, which disrupted their daily routine. One cold night, when everyone was in sound sleep, a loud scream awakened everyone. When they woke up, what they saw startled them. It was their 60-year-old mother who was sitting with her head down in a weird position, her hair covering her face, and she was screaming in a manly voice. She was possessed by a spirit, and it was a malevolent spirit. She started saying things like Yi marigari chiaha se niklo, mainyaha kisiko tu mahin se jayada nai ren data. Translation: This is my house, leave from here. I don't allow people to live here for more than 2 months. The family members were shocked at the same time helpless with the incident. That night somehow passed with terror. The next day they informed my house help about the incident and advised her not to suggest anyone this house for rent and that they were leaving from there forever. They had to find a new house, which they somehow arranged within 2 days. Those 2 nights were the hardest nights of their life as the same incident repeated and their mother's health worsened. Later they shifted to a new place and everything was fine again. They came to know later about that house that earlier many people had lived there for rent, but they never completed the term of rent, which is 6 months, and used to vacate the place within the span of 2 months. The house was haunted by the spirit of a woman and her spouse. We were in shock to hear the incident, as in an urban complex like ours, we never expected flats with such spooky past. It was hard to believe, but it is somewhere true that there is something beyond science which has no firm explanations.